All right, here we go. We're on. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to me, Tina. Wow, returning champion again. I'm excited about today's talk because we're gonna traveling back into Egypt before the Greek. That's what Hans told me. So let's welcome Hans. Hey, how are
Thank
you
you.
doing, Hans?
Excellent, Tina. Thanks
Um,
for having me back on. This is exciting. I just got back from Mount Shasta, where it was an amazing event, the summer event with Rob Potter. I had a lecture Friday morning last week
wow,
to about 80, 85 people, sold about 10 books. And it was exciting because when the lecture started, there were probably 10 people in the crowd. Like,
I
how do I get
think
these? How do I get these 9 in the morning slots? But it turned out great. And so Mount
wow.
Shasta, super beautiful, super activated. Got to climb up the mountain on the full moon. There were a bunch of full moon parties there, and then got to swim in some of the lakes and see some of the beautiful waterfalls.
Did you see
I,
aliens? Did you see UFO? Like,
there were a lot of UFO activity going on in the skies, things that would blip in, like expand and then disappear. So we
whoa.
watched. There was a Star Watch one night, but because I had a rental car, my car broke down on the way down there. I had a rock flip up into my radiator, so it took out my
Man,
hybrid. So I was in Roseburg, Oregon at the time, and I had to leave my car at the dealership for them to fix. And
wow.
fortunately, things worked out, and I got a rental, and I drove down there. And the Star Watch would have been amazing, but it was on this road that was just boulders and potholes everywhere. And so I made it about halfway to the spot, and my friends didn't put a pin on my map, so I had no idea where I was going. I just turned around and went back up the mountain to the ski bowl area and just watched the stars from there. But
Oh,
super
wow.
amazing,
Yes,
amazing
yes.
place. I need to go back down there. Yeah.
We all need to go back. I went there before and need to go back. I've run into several people who went there and have amazing experience as well with this supernatural UFO
Right. I want to
sighting.
I
Yeah.
want to see some of the lava tubes as well. So there's like Apollo's or yeah, I guess it's called Apollo's Cave, something like this. But
Yeah, yeah.
super
Well, I
amazing.
haven't
Like some of the photos that other people were posting, I was like, why didn't I know about this? I would have stayed longer. But yeah, because I
uh,
had a snafu with my car, I couldn't. So
next time. But hey, you know what? Oh, there's always next time. Next year we can go. And guess what, everyone? If you guys are watching or are going to Conscious Life Expo next year, 2025, Hans may be going over there. So
yay.
I encourage everyone to attend Hans' workshop. He's amazing
Appreciate
speaker.
that. Thank you.
I get a lot of people. I actually like get a lot of Thai people who understand English and they watch your YouTube. And they'll tell me like, man, this guy knows a lot. This guy got a lot of information. Tina, I watched this video, symbolism that we interview you, and the first one was
Buddhist cultural mysticism, the connection to Sirius and the Dropa Stones. Yeah.
exactly. That was the first video that blew them away, and they get a lot of people email me. Them even went to your website to buy some books. I heard,
Yeah.
they're all contacting me, and they're like, "Man, this guy's good. Where did you get this guy from? He knows a lot. He got so much information, and he knows more than a lot of people." I go, "Yeah, he's good. That's why I kept getting him back to share
Well, I
information with
keep doing
everyone."
more topics. I did an interview with Walter Bosley, I believe it was 2 weeks ago,
Mhm.
and we talked about Shambala, and so all the connections to Shambala, which kind of dovetails with my Dropa stuff. But we had specifically gone into this topic because he does a lot of research around Alice Bailey, Nicholas Roerich, um,
Wow, I
Helena
love Alice work.
Blavatsky, and I can't remember the other woman's name. Her name's Alexandria Neal. And so they all
Wow.
were searching for Shambhala and the Sintamani stone in that region. And so I decided, well, here's another topic I could talk on.
Yeah, let's talk about that on the next one then.
That's
But
the next
today,
one. Excellent. But
today
today we're
let's
gonna we're gonna we're gonna dive into chematology,
right.
uh,
Yeah, let's
basically
begin.
symbology of ancient Egypt prior to the Greeks. So around 300 BC, after Alexander the Great invaded and conquered Greece, the Greeks arrived and they decided, well, this is now our territory because it was conquered by Greece during that time.
Mm.
And so they showed up there and decided that they were going to write their history of Egypt, which is the history that we are taught today. But there actually is a tradition and a history that goes far beyond and far further back than that. that seem to have been usurped. And so maybe I'll just dive into my screen here. This was my workshop actually in Shasta was on this, and so it was super exciting
cool.
to do it downtown. And the room I was in was amazingly beautiful. It was such an amazing spot.
It's a beautiful place. Anyone who's never been to Mount Shasta before, definitely highly recommend it as well. Rob Potter always have a event every year in July.
Yes.
Alien event. Oh, ooh, check this out.
Which screen is sharing right now?
I see Egypt and the land of Kemet, which it has an image of, I guess, believe is
It's Anubis.
yes, yes. I
So
was trying to figure out the name, Anubis.
excellent.
So
So I hope I'm sharing the right screen here.
yeah, you
Last time.
are. Yeah, that's a cool
Great.
picture.
This is actually a drawing that I did with a friend of mine. We were both in Egypt together in 2016. And so he and I kind of came up with this concept. He's a tattoo artist, and we put this together. And so I actually
I
sell this as
wonder
one of my shirts. But
as I said, I never seen this before, and it looks like there's a lot of symbolism and
yep.
both there in the body and then all around it.
So anyway, welcome to Egypt and the land of Kemet. This is an alternative history of mysteries and symbology by me, Hans Dietrich. Anyway, so what is chematology? So chematology comes to us through indigenous wisdom that was passed down generation by generation orally through history. It comes to us by my teachers. Patricia Awyan Lehman, Stephen Mehler, and Patricia's husband Yousef were the ones that I met in Peru in 2014, who got me very interested in this subject. But they got their knowledge from Abdel Hakim Awyan, who sadly wested in 2008. The ancient Cometians did not believe in the concept of death, but they did believe in westing. And so everything deals with going into the Western lands, into the Duat, following the sun over the horizon, shedding your different shells, and then either being reborn or becoming a light body. But Hakim's word and message was really powerful and amazing. If you've ever seen the Pyramid Code, which is a 4-part series, you can find it on YouTube. I believe you can also find it on Gaia, I believe. It's amazing, and Hakim is featured in a couple of the episodes as the indigenous wisdom keeper.
Wow.
But anyway, so Kemet and chematology basically is the study of Egypt before the Greeks changed most of Egypt's history, and Egypt's history today it comes out of the Greek understanding and changing of the history, basically. So where does Kemet come from? So Kemet comes from this symbol, and so hieroglyphs don't match for, say, English or Latin letters. They are symbols, and all of the symbols can either be their own symbol, which has their own meaning, or they can be combined into a combination of symbols. And so Kemet is this berm on the left-hand side. This represents the irrigation berm. In the middle is the owl, which represents darkness. To the right is the dome, which represents Nut, the netter or the nature of the sky. And the circle with the X in it represents a place. And so traditionally, Kemet means the black fertile land. And here are the definitions basically of each of the symbols, but combined we get Kemt or Kemet. And the reason why it's Kemt or Kemet is because the vowels often in the ancient tongues were never written down, but they were pronounced. And so the vowels are kind of where the magic of these times exists in spoken word. We get the words alchemy, chemistry, chemical, chemo, and chemist from Kemet. This is both a Suf and Arabic word, and all represent alchemical symbols. So the question is, where did Egyptology come from? Well, this is a good one. So Egyptology comes basically out of Jean-Francois Champollion. He was basically the first person to, as we are told, decipher the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt because of the Rosetta Stone. And so we had 3 different dialogues going on the Rosetta Stone. But I'm a little skeptical of his translations because, as you see the Rosetta Stone here on the right, it's broken. So there are many hieroglyphs and many concepts missing. And so I'm not sure exactly how prolific and how accurate his translations were as a result of this. And then Egyptologists mainly study what the Greeks put into their history of ancient Egypt after they were there around 300 BC, after Alexander the Great had conquered the land. And so basically, the Greeks came in, they were taken to the city of Memphis, which actually is not the name of the city. Anything that ends with an is or ice, these are the Greek names of all these ancient sites, but these are what we're taught in history. And it's so interesting to see other researchers claim that, oh, this is, the goddess Isis or Osiris goes way back. Well, they do, but not with those names. And so it's quite fascinating that we have these different names. Anyway, they were taken to Memphis, which was called Min Nefer, and Min is the Nefer of the Neter, the aspect of nature that represents fertility, and Nefer means harmony. So it's the harmony of fertility. And since Memphis is where Cairo is today, this is where the fertility of the Nile would have been. And so they showed up and they went to a temple site, and on a stele at the temple, it said Hetka Ptah, which is in the Suf ancient language of ancient Kem. Well, Hetka Ptah means the enclosure or temple of the body of the creator god Ptah, which is depicted here on the right. Ka is your body double. I guess the best way of describing your ka is if you have an out-of-body experience and you're laying on a bed or sitting in a chair, but your consciousness is floating through the room, and you look down at your body still sitting there, you and your consciousness are still, vibrant and alive, but your body double is the one that's sitting there vacant in the chair or on a bed. And so that's your ka. It's your body double or
that's
physical.
like an out-of-body experience, right? OBE.
Yes, correct. And so het ka pata is interesting because the Greeks heard het keptos, which is where we get the origin of the name Coptic. And so the Coptics were in ancient Egypt or Kem for 1,000 or 2,000 years BC. And it's interesting because Kaptos is also Kapata. And so this also means the body or son of the creator. And so Het Kaptos became, became Egypt or Egyptos, which we now know as Egypt. And so instead of just being this temple that's dedicated to Ptah, the Greeks thought it meant the entirety of the land. And this is why they called it Egyptos. What's interesting about this as well is, the Coptics were also the Coptic Christians. And this is where we get into Jesus Christ. I'm not a religious scholar, but it is very fascinating to me that Jesus comes from the word Zeus, or the son of Zeus, or Yeshua, which is the body or son of the creator. And Christ is a title. And so Christ in ancient Greek is Christos, which means the anointed. So Jesus Christos is the anointed son or body of the creator. And so this isn't a person, it's a title. So wow. I've always found this interesting. And this kind of segues into how the Greeks changed all the names and what the original Comitian names were and their meanings. So on the left are the Greek names, on the right will be the Comitian names. The first of these is Tanis, which is a city to the north. Tanis was known as Genet or Genet, which meant the fertile garden oasis. And where Tanis is located is right near the Nile Delta at the Mediterranean. And so this would have been a fertile garden of Eden of sorts. But the Greeks called it Tanis, not Genet. The next is Heliopolis. Well, Heliopolis was known as the city of the sun to the Greeks.
Hans, I don't think, are you supposed to have an image up for that?
Image? Are you not seeing anything?
I see the image of I think the one we're seeing up right now is Het Kapata and Het Kaptos.
Oh, weird. How did it not go forward?
Yeah. As you continue talking, I didn't see any new images.
Let me drop out of the share and go back into the share. So it should be desktop 2, Microsoft PowerPoint. Maybe that's the one I should be using. Okay. Can you see it now? There we go.
No, it hasn't changed yet.
It hasn't changed on your end?
Yeah, not from my end. It's still at the same image here.
Oh, how weird. Okay.
Yeah.
On my end, it's now you're blanked out. Are you there?
I mean, yeah, I see the image. It's still the same image that you had it up earlier. Nothing's changed. As you are changing it, it hasn't been
I'm
switched.
currently not sharing, so interesting.
Yeah, maybe
Let's
I think when you
figure
click
out.
sharing, there's supposed to be a couple boxes that you have to check
Yeah,
too.
no, there. Okay, here we go again. Let's try
Yeah.
this. What do you see now?
Still the same, hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed. What?
Yeah.
This is interesting.
I
Let's
can
go
pause a
back.
little bit here. Ah,
So all you see is head kapata. What do you see now? Yeah, that's weird that it's not
yeah, now
showing.
now you see more. Now you see a different screen, so that's cool. Yeah, it's all
What what
working now.
what are you seeing? It says het
But
kaptos
it's yeah, and
Egyptos.
then on the right side, Egyptos. No, as you
Okay,
were
great,
talking, you said the
great.
right side. Earlier, I didn't see that. Yeah, so
Yeah,
this
no
is
worries.
good.
Okay, well let's move forward. So
There you go.
these are the Greek names on the left. On the right are the Comitian names. And so, are you seeing Tanis now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so Tanis is Genet. Heliopolis was the city of the sun, which was known as Un or On, which means the city of the wise sun. But to the Greeks, they called it Heliopolis, the city of the
Mm.
sun. Next is Memphis, as we talked. It's Min Nefer, which means fertile harmony. And so Memphis is where modern day Cairo is. And this would have been a very fertile plain because of the even flow of the Nile River in this area. Next is Ramses, this famous character Ramses. Well, Ramses actually is a title, and it means Ra Masu, which is the rebirth of the sun.
Oh.
Then we have Osiris. Osiris was known as Wazir,
Ah.
and the land of Osiris around Giza was known as Bu Wazir. And so Wazir means the wise, but the Greeks called him Osiris or Osiris, basically.
Osiris.
Osiris, yeah. We have his consort Isis. Isis comes from Aset. Aset means the water of life. Os is usually water. Osgat, Aset. So she is known as the water of life. It's a title, not a person. Next is Anubis, which comes from Anup, which means the decaying sun. And it's interesting because Anubis guards the opening to the afterlife. And so we'll get into my thoughts about Anubis because they do contradict a little bit of the teachings that I had learned from Patricia, Yousef, Stephen,
Oh,
and
okay, cool.
just my
So
my
interesting.
interpretation of
Interesting.
this.
Osiris, Isis, all this name just been changed by the
Yeah,
Greeks.
and we are taught only the Greek history of Egypt, which is why I
Wow.
put this
Okay,
together. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yes.
there are other misinterpreted Suf words. One is hor. Hor means the male aspect of the house, where Hathor is the female aspect of the house. But we're told that Hathor was a god or goddess, and she has her own temple. But we'll get into this when we get into the five houses. We
Mm,
also have Aswan. As is water, and Suan is of the south. And so Aswan is located at the southern point of Egypt,
hmm
and so it means the southern waters of the Nile. We also have Asgat Nefer, which means the harmony of water, and is represented by the symbol of the foot, the jug, and the water pouring. And so this means that the water at this place is drinkable, it's potable, and it's also, how do we say it, structured water that can be used also for the fertility of the land.
mm,
Next is Unas pyramid. The Unas pyramid is interesting because this is where the pyramid code actually is found. It's the
mm.
only pyramid in Egypt that has hieroglyphic writing inside of it. And in
Oh,
front of it was a man-made lake. And so Unas means the wise sun meets the water. And so like
mm.
Washington, D.C., the Washington Monument, it has a reflection pool. The Unas pyramid also had a reflection pool in front of it in ancient times.
Wow.
Next is Amun Ra. So we're told often that Ra or Amun Ra means the sun, but
Mhm.
these are just two aspects of the sun. It means the power of the hidden sun,
No,
which gets
okay.
us into Horus, because Horus was the child of Isis and Osiris in aspect. But Horus also represents the rising and setting sun. This is where we get the word horizon from. It's from
Uh,
Horus or hours. And in tradition, for 80 years, Horus fights his uncle Set or Seth, which represents the human lifetime of sun rising and sunset. So you have Horus rising and he's fighting Set. So it's the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun. And if we look at, as I like to quote movies, we look at the Star Wars trilogy, we have Luke Skywalker. Well, Luke is a shorthand name for Lucius. Lucius means the sun. So the sun that walks across the sky. In the trilogy, he meets his dark father, the night or darkness, the sunset, and he fights his father through the darkness, only to be reborn again as the sun he needs to become, or the light body that he eventually becomes.
Wow.
So there's a lot of interesting ancient esoteric philosophy in movies.
A lot of them in the movie, the symbology.
If you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
There also is an interesting connection to Mars. So the Cometians were, basically in the area of northern Africa, but there also is a major tie to the Phoenicians. And so the Kemet Empire stretched across northern Africa all the way up into Lebanon and Turkey in ancient times. And this was also known as Phoenicia. So Comitia, Phoenicia. And what's interesting is Cairo in Arabic means Al-Qahira, which means the vanquisher, the warrior, or the city of Mars. And so Cairo is named after Mars, the planet, which is really interesting.
Wow.
And if we look at the Phoenician connection, it all resides around the 33rd degree north parallel. And this is where we find this area of Phoenicia known as Cydonia. And so it's interesting that when NASA went to Mars in the 1970s, around the 33rd degree parallel, they discovered the face on Mars, and nearby the face on Mars is what is called the city, and there's a bunch of pyramidical structures in the city.
Right.
It's interesting from a distance, it looks like a cat's face, but in reality, there's a bunch of pyramids
it's
there.
the same degree.
Yep, and NASA called this area Cydonia, which is incredibly fascinating because we find pyramids at both locations. The pyramids of Giza are known to represent the belt stars of Orion, but the pyramids in this region of Mars actually represent the Pleiades. And so this is an interesting correlation to ancient chem that a lot of people don't even know about.
No, nobody, I don't know about this. But what's interesting is like a mirror from the sky.
Correct. Looking down at the site. Correct.
Exactly.
And this is when
even
we
the
were
Niles
talking
River. Yeah, even the Niles River up into Orion's belt.
Right.
Looks like a mirror into the sky, right?
And there's similar aspects to this when we were talking about the Dropa with the pyramidical structures in China, as well as the star fort towers in Kham, Tibet. And so it would be nice to see a downward photograph from space of these regions so that we can actually try and align them to different stars.
Let me ask you, there is a lot of focus of going up to Mars, with Elon Musk. What do you see? Anything has any connection to do with this at all?
Great possibility. And so when you look at the Mahabharata and you look at the ancient Vedas, apparently in the ancient past there was a huge outburst from our sun. And so the elites of the time banded together and they built these generational arcs, similar to what we were talking about with the Dropa. They built these ships, and they in the Vedas it says that they went to the fourth density from the sun. Well, the fourth density would be a planet, and that would be Mars. And they stayed there for 2,000-3,000 years. Because of the gravity there, their height changed. Because of the lack of sun there, their skin tone changed. They were blue and green, skin tone, and they had auburn hair and blue and green eyes. And this is where a lot of this comes from, around our own earthly, the people of Earth. Basically, you have the Bosque and people coming out of Azerbaijan and Iran that have this auburn hair and blue-green eyes, and also the Dropa people, which come from Sirius.
Right.
But the thought is that a lot of our ancestry had come from Mars. And when you look into the Anunnaki, the Igigi supposedly also came from Mars. And so there's this challenge of maybe we can go back to Mars. However, I have a feeling that Mars is not the immediate destination. It's the asteroid belt, I think, that is. Because in the
Really?
asteroid belt, we can find all sorts of metals and minerals that could be mined. And so a lot of what Elon Musk now is trying to do is put into space either robotic or manned machined vehicles that can go into the asteroid belt and start mining some of these materials and bring them back to Earth. And eventually, we will get to Mars, but I don't think it's quite in the cards yet.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. Wow, this is fascinating with these images here.
So this takes us into more of the Cometian cosmology. The Cometians used a lot of patterns of 5. So we have the 5 sacred houses, and we have the 5 phases of the sun. The Greeks only saw one phase of the sun, and that was Ra. And so from that point forward, it's either Amun-Ra or Ra. And this is what we are taught that the ancient Egyptians thought of their sun. It was called Ra. But Ra is actually only one phase of the sun. So the first phase of the sun is early morning, and it's called Sahra. This is also known as Kefir, the dung beetle, that rolls a ball of dung with its larva inside of it to the top of a sand dune. As the sun is rising, the sun will bake the dung ball, and the larvae have something to eat when they are born. This is the birth. This is why Sahra means the birth of the sun. This is where also we get Horus on the horizon, or horizon and hours from, and also the name or title of Sarah. So a lot of us know people named Sarah. Sarah comes from Sahra, which means the birth of the sun. The second phase of the sun is known as Ra, the adolescent or angry sun. And so this is the sun before noon. It's bright, it hurts, there's a lot of sun rays. Ra is where we get the word ray from. It's interesting that we find this also in Israel, which means the sun god over water. So
right, yeah.
So there's a lot of etymology that goes into some of these ancient Cometian words that end up in today's linguistics. The third phase of the sun is known as Un, or On, the wise sun. This is where we get the word noon or afternoon from, or even to turn something on like a light switch. Turn it on. And Heliopolis was named after Un, or On, the city of the sun. The fourth phase of the sun is known as Aten. And so Aten was known as the wise sun or the enlightened sun. And from Aten, we get attention, presence, and harmony. These words come out of this ancient concept of the sun.
Got more symbol.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so the last phase of the sun was known as Amun. And this is the veil of darkness, the hidden or westing sun, the sun that goes over the horizon into darkness. And in Christianity, this is where the prayer Amen comes from, and Islam, Amin. And so when you're praying to the Most High, please hear my prayer, Amen. It's interesting because you're actually doing the reverse of that. You're asking for your prayer to be hidden in darkness and never to be heard. And so there's a weird flip of meanings with these words into Christian practice.
Never say that word after you pray, right?
Right, exactly, because you're actually saying darkness, not enlightenment. So anyway,
right? Yeah. Cool.
There's also a bunch of spiritual Suf names of 2 kings, and so Aten, as I said, means the wise or enlightened sun. And so we have this character named Amenhotep IV. Amun is the hidden sun, and Hotep is an altar. And so his name basically represents the veil of the hidden altar. But he changed his name when he became the king to Akhenaten, which means the light body and the key of enlightenment. And he was known as the first historical monotheist. Akhenaten. So here in his name, he is saying, I am the key of life and the key of the sun, basically. His son was known as, his how do you say it? His vizier, or one of his noblemen that practiced under him, was named as Pa-Ren-Nefer. And Pa-Ren-Nefer means the harmony of secret names, because Ren, as we'll learn shortly, means the secret name or the hidden name. But this guy changed his name, and we'll get into that in a second. Akhenaten's son was known as Tutankhamun. So Ankh means the key of life. And so Tutankhamun is the completed key of life, the hidden completed key of life, basically. And so this was Akhenaten's son. But who was Paran Nefer? Well, this is the character that we think of as Moses. I always thought that Moses came from Tutmosis, one of the kings of ancient Egypt, but in fact, it comes from Ramasu, which is Ramses. And so Ramses the first was actually Moses in biblical terms, and he was known as the second historical monotheist, where Akhenaten, his predecessor, was known as the first. And so these are Suf words that have been misconstrued also through the Egyptian history written by the Greeks. This takes us into the 9 souls of the afterlife. Well, there's actually 8 souls, but we'll get into this. And they called the afterlife westing, because when you die, or when you west, you follow, your body and your spirit follows the sun over the horizon toward the western lands, into the Duat. And what happens, it's like a Russian doll. You shed different layers of your existence, your physical body, your spiritual body, all this, to become a light body. And if you can achieve this in one lifetime, you become the 9th soul, which is an enlightened soul. If you don't, you come back again and you have to repeat all this all over again. And so the first aspect of the 9 souls is called Het, and this is your physical body. The second is called Sa, and this is your spiritual body. And these are the ancient Comitian hieroglyphs that represent these concepts. The third is called Ren, and this is the secret name, or your identity. This is not your physical name, but this is your secret name. This is a spiritual name that you house inside of yourself. The fourth is called Ba, and Ba is your head on the body of a bird. And the Ba is known as the personality or the spirit. If you've ever watched the movie Spirited Away by Miyazaki, the woman that runs the bathhouse in the animation, at night she turns into a bird with her head on it, and she flies toward the western sun, or toward
What's
the
the name of that
sun.
movie again?
It's called Spirited Away. It's an amazing animation by Miyazaki, Japanese animator. Really amazing. Anyway, but it's interesting that they have this concept in that movie. The fifth element is your Ka, which is your body double or your vital essence. As we described earlier, the Ka is your physical double, basically. This is your physical body. Then we have Ib. Ib is your heart, and it's represented by a canopic jar, which is what they would put different aspects of your body in when they were mummifying you. And so your heart would go into this canopic jar called the Ib. So this is your heart. And then you have Shut, which is the shadow. So obviously, you know, we're beings of light. We cast the shadow. And so the shadow is also considered part of your 7 souls, or your 9 souls for that matter. And the 8th soul is called Sechem, which is the power or energy form. And so if you can complete all of the shedding of these elements while you're going through the Duat of the Western land, then you will become Achen, which is the light body, a spiritual body that, you know, that exists forever in the cosmos. Otherwise, you have to come back and redo it all over again. And so it's interesting because this kind of flows into the question around, what was the Great Sphinx? What was it for? Well, the Great Sphinx is interesting because today the head is much smaller than the body, and it's a carving of an African woman's face. It's not a man's face, it's an African woman's face. And they even took it so far to give her a false beard, which exists in the Cairo Museum. But in ancient times, there's a thought that it could have been a lion, because in the east, direction it's facing, Leo rises on the horizon about 10,000 years ago. And so this is the thought of when this might have been made. Maybe it's looking at its mirror rising on the horizon of Leo. But in my thought, and you know, there are other scholars that also think this, I think it was actually Anubis. Because sitting behind Anubis are the 9 pyramids, which are your 9 souls. And as the sun sets in the west, it sets behind the pyramids. And so Anubis is guarding the entrance to the Western land, the Western deserts, where your soul will go to shed all of
Whoa.
its elements. And so I have a strong thought that the Great Sphinx, Tefnuti, as what she's called, the spittle of Nut, is actually Anubis.
That would make
That's
sense
just
because
that's
earlier
just
you
my
mentioned
thought.
about Anubis is the god of afterlife. Is that what it
Yeah,
is? Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so these are the 9 pyramids at Giza. We're only told that there are 3 there, but there actually are
Yeah.
9. And
What happened
sitting
to
in
the
front of
rest?
them,
Yeah.
they're still there. They're just smaller. They're the smaller
Mhm.
pyramids that sit in front of the Great Pyramid and in front of the 3rd pyramid, which is even smaller. And what's even more interesting, is to the west of this was what was known as the Ur Nile, and the Ur Nile was what happened when the Holocene comet broke up and hit different areas of the Earth. Part of it splashed down in the Mediterranean, and it would have splashed up and over into the northern African jungles, the Mediterranean water, which would have killed the trees and turned it all into basically sand and dunes. And so this is what we see today. But if you look at satellite photos of this area, it's very obvious that this huge body of water was what now makes up the western deserts of the Sahara. And so this was known as the Ur Nile. And if you look at the Great Pyramids from above, they all have 8 sides. They're not 4-sided. They have this slight convexure on all sides. So it creates this interesting 8-sided system, which shows up even today. This is how we use over the horizon radar, is we use a very similar 8-sided pyramid to collect radar information. And so what
Mm.
were the pyramids actually for? So
Yeah.
let's get into the 5 sacred houses, because this is where
Oh, this is
chematology
fascinating. Yes.
really leaves Egyptology in the dust. So there are 5 houses. The houses were known as purs. And so it was basically a broken box with a hieroglyphic symbol. The 5th house is called Pur-Wer. And so this is the house of the wise. It's usually an old man or a man with a cane or a staff, and it represented a university, a hospital, or a library. The 4th netter, or the 4th pur, was known as Pernetter, and it was symbolic of an axe head or a flag. And this was a house of energy, or an aspect of energy, because netter were not the gods, they were aspects of nature. And this is where nature, this is where this word nature comes from. And so the pernetters were the pyramids. And the Greeks knew that these weren't tombs. No king has ever been found or buried in one of the pyramids, because they were energy devices. And the Greeks called them pyramidos, the fire in the middle, but they represented pernetter, the house of energy. In the middle, we have Perka. And so this is the house of the body. This is a tomb. This is where the kings were buried. In the Valley of the Kings, these are all Perkas, not the pyramids, as we've been told by both the Greeks and most of our Egyptologists today, that the pyramids were all tombs for the pharaohs. Well, they were not. Then we have Perba. This is the house of the spirit. And this is a temple, or a place of worship. But the most important of the 5 sacred houses was Per-Ah. And Per-Ah was known as the house of the woman, the high house of the woman. And this is
Mm.
where the word pharaoh comes from. There were no male pharaohs in ancient Kemet or Egypt,
Well,
period. Period. End of story. Just did not exist. They were all kings. And this is because the ancients used a system of matriarchy that was a unity project. And so the high priestesses of Hatshepsut, Hathor, the high house of the woman, and Isis or Aset were the ones that would choose their consort who would become king. The women ruled over the fertility of the land, the men ruled over the fertility the land and the people, and the men ruled over the physicality of the land and the people. And together they formed a matriarchy or a unity project. But because the Greeks were patrilineage, they only saw the lineage being passed down from king to son, king to son. Uh,
wow.
Good Egyptologists and archaeologists will say in the time of Pharaoh, there was King Tutmosis, King Ramses, King Akhenaten, but they never actually call them pharaohs. But a lot of Egyptologists and archaeologists today have gotten lazy and they call them all pharaohs. Completely wrong.
Ah,
Completely wrong.
so
And so
no
we
wonder
see
they
this.
said, yeah, this is sorry for interrupting because I have
Oh,
heard
no
that
worries.
that original of time that's when the women were actually were the one who rules
Right.
the
If you
world.
go to
Yeah.
Egypt today and you go in Aswan and you go across to the island groups, there's a group of people known as why is it spacing me all of a sudden?
Mhm.
The Nubians, sorry. So the Nubians are all a matriarchy society as well. The men go out and handle, sales and some of the tourist aspects. The women run the house and the food and all the fertility of the land. And so today, the Nubian society actually exists with this ancient matriarchy. But we see with the ancient sculptures, we always see the woman with her arm around her king. Where today the man has his arm around his woman, hey baby. But in the old days, it was a status symbol of this is mine. And so
Mm.
the queen or the pharaoh was the woman, and her king was her consort. And so you see this aspect with so many different statues all around Egypt, as we see here. There
Wow.
are other houses though, which is interesting. And so we have the house called Per Aset or Per Isis, and this is where the word Paris comes from, because
Mm.
Paris was across the Mediterranean, was known as the House of Aset, or the harmony of water, or the water of life, sorry, because it was across the great waters. And we also have Per Ankh, and the Ankh was known as the key of life. And when we did symbology, it also represents the female reproduction organs. And so the key of life becomes the house of life with Per Ankh. And even more fascinating is there's one more I'm sure there's many more, but there's one more that was found by Yousef in
Mm.
Tanis, and it's this. And so this is a broken box with the symbol of the sky above three of the broken boxes sitting on top of four lines of water. And so what this translates to is the land or the place of many houses is across four waters from the sacred sky of Nut above Tanis or Genet or ancient Kem, basically. And so this is basically called Peru, the land of many houses across four waters. And this is the
Wow.
symbol that it represents. Now, this is not where the country Peru actually got its name from, but it is fascinating that in the ancient Suf language, Peru means the
Mm.
land of many houses, and it's across four waters. Well, we're told that the ancients never crossed the oceans, and pardon my French, this is complete hooey. We definitely crossed the oceans. They were
Yes.
not barriers; they were highways. And so, if you were to leave the ancient land of Kemet and cross four waters to the land of Peru, what would those four waters be? Well, it would be the Nile, the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and the Amazon. Or you
Ah.
could go all the way down the southern coast of South America, catch the trade currents, and go up the other west coast of South America and end up at Peru. So it would be the Pacific Ocean as well. And so those would have been the four bodies of water. And it's interesting because you can also go the other direction. You can go the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean. And you would also end up in what was ancient Peru or the Inca Empire. And
Wow.
is
That
there
was the
is there
miles for. Mm-hmm.
yeah, is there actually a history of this with the ancients? There is.
Mm-hmm.
So Freddie Silva actually talks recently about ancient Cometians that had traveled across the ocean more than 2,000 years before Christ. So 2000 BC or further back, there was definitely a crossing of the oceans back then. But during the Greco-Egyptian times or the Greco-Cometian times, in 232 BC, we have this character known as Mahui, Admiral Mahui, and his captain Rata, and they set out with a bunch of ships and sailed from Egypt and made it all the way to South America. And it's interesting because the Polynesians know Mahui as Maui, who was a
Mm-hmm.
legend. He was a god that came from the sea and unified all their people. Well, he was actually a real person. And so
Ah.
this is the route that he would have taken. And so we know from the Maori oral traditions that Maui showed up in New Zealand. And so he crossed the Indian Ocean, he circumnavigated around Australia, and he ended up on the north shore of New Zealand. and met with the Maori. And it's interesting because a lot of the ancient Maori come out of the region of the Black Sea and around Azerbaijan and Iran based on their haploblood group. They also have this auburn red hair and blue eyes or green eyes. And so this is fascinating that we
Wow.
find this in New Zealand from this ancient group of the Maori. But he then would have caught the trade currents and trade winds that would have pushed him across the Pacific Ocean toward around Santiago de Chile, up to Peru and Bolivia, even over to Easter Island. We discovered that through Kon-Tiki, through Thor Heyerdahl's work, he built a reed boat pushed off from the shores of Paracas, never put up his sails, and ended up on Easter Island, just riding the currents. And there's so much similarity between what we find in Peru and Easter Island, as well as some of the sites that we see in New Zealand. He then would have pushed off with Captain Rata and his ships and gone to Hawaii or Hawaii, and possibly back down to the Pitcairn Islands, Polynesia, as well as Tonga, and then over to Indonesia, or Irian Jaya, which was ancient Indonesia. But if he had also caught the trade currents from Hawaii, he could have ended up on the west coast of the United States and Mexico, where there's a huge connection to the ancient Mayan culture in Mexico with ancient Egypt as well, or ancient Kemet, and even all the way up into Alaska, where we find the artifacts of the Native Americans going all the way up the west coast of the United States and Canada into Alaska to be very similar to what we find in Hawaii, on Easter Island, and in New Zealand and the rest of Polynesia. And how do we know this is the case? Well, this is basically how the Pacific winds and trade currents go. And so it's very obvious that this could be easily done with somebody in a boat following these trade currents. Wow. And we know they cross the oceans because you go to the Temple of Hatshepsut and you see this on the wall. And this is a boat that has sails and oarsmen, and they are sailing over animals and creatures that are not native to the Mediterranean or the Red Sea, but more of the Indian Ocean. And so this is a papyrus depiction of the same scene. And so we know that they cross the oceans. I mean,
oh my God.
It's very evident.
I have seen that image before. Yes, yes.
How do we know that they made it to Peru or South America? Well, when I went to Peru in 2014, we went into the Larco Lima Gold Museum. And in the basement, in the back corner, are a bunch of mannequins wearing what they call Chimu burial adornments, a headdress and a chest plate. And it looks something like this. Well, this is interesting because we're told this comes from about 1400 AD, so only a couple hundred years ago. But the character in the middle is clearly wearing the headdress of Amun from ancient Kem or ancient Egypt. And so this headdress, dates back before 1600 BC. But here it is on a mannequin as a Chimu burial headdress from ancient Inca. Or
My
ancient
God,
Peru.
that's exactly the same thing.
It's exactly the same. And oftentimes it's either depicted in Egypt with scales or with round circular items like we see on the two on the left and the right, or solid with no adornments at all. But it represents duality, which is what Amun represents. It represents the sun and the darkness. And so there's the duality of light and dark, yin and yang. And so it's very fascinating that we see this in ancient Peru as well. Totally mislabeled, in my opinion. And we know that they cross the oceans because in Bolivia, they make the exact same reed boats that they make in ancient Egypt and Egypt today. And so the ancient reed boats of Bolivia, sail across Lake Titicaca, the highest lake in the world. Lake Titicaca was not at that elevation in its early existence. There's a possibility that apostases happened when the Halicene comet hit because so much ice melted, the Earth plates shifted and pushed half of Bolivia up into this high altitude region. But there are seahorses in this lake, and seahorses only exist in the ocean. And so the question is, how are there seahorses and baby sharks also in Lake Titicaca? But this is a depiction of the boats from both ancient Egypt and ancient Peru and Bolivia.
Interesting, Hans, the boats, it looks like a dragon head, or it has a tail on both of them, doesn't it? Yeah.
Right. And so, interestingly, around a couple hundred years ago, just north of Lake Titicaca, about 100 kilometers north of Lake Titicaca, a farmer, while plowing his field, dug up a vessel or a bowl. And the bowl's about, a yard or a meter wide. And around the outside of it, it has depictions of sea animals as well as land animals. And inside of it, it has ancient Sumerian cuneiform writing, actually two forms of ancient Proto-Sumerian or Proto-Cuneiform writing. And this has been translated by the University of California, I believe at Davis. Somebody actually translated the cuneiform in this bowl, and this bowl is known as the Fuente Magna bowl. And this proves that the Phoenicians or the ancient Sumerians had crossed the ocean in ancient times. And so what is written on the bowl is this. The decipherment of the inscriptions of the Fuente Magna bowl indicates that it was used to make libations to the goddess Nia, to request fertility, and to offer thanks to the bountiful fauna and flora in the area that made it possible for these ancient Sumerian explorers to support themselves in Bolivia. So this is the translation. And a lot of people today think this is a hoax, it can't be real, but there is also a stele found in the same region that sadly sits in the basement of the La Paz Museum in Bolivia that also has Proto-Sumerian cuneiform writing on it.
Wow, fascinating.
So I was saying that the ancient Commissions did cross the ocean about 2000, to 2500 BC. And we find this in a place in Australia called Gosford. So Gosford is a small ravine that sits just outside of Sydney. And so Sydney is on the east coast of Australia. And on both sides of the ravine are these interesting but ancient Commission hieroglyphs. And a lot of people think that these are fake, primarily because they don't look like the hieroglyphs that we see in Egypt, because the hieroglyphs that we see in Egypt are more of a like a professional doing this on the temple walls versus somebody who's doing it through handwriting. And so there's two different types of this cuneiform or this hieroglyphic writing. People like Billy Carson say that one side of the canyon has Pleiadian writing on it, but they're actually both in this ancient Commission writing. And we've had 3 independent scholars go there and translate what it says. And so the rough translation is around 2500 BC, 2 brothers set sail to do trade with the people of Australia. The trade went well, but when they left Australia, they were caught in a storm in the Indian Ocean, which capsized their ship. One of the brothers died, and the other brother made it back to shore. And as a memorial and an homage to his brother, he created the glyphs in Gosford. And so it's basically a memorial for his brother. And it's said that there's also an ancient pyramid there, very similar to the one in Indonesia, that's made out of more shale rock than what we see in Egypt. But there is a pyramidical structure near Gosford. And so right here, it proves that they were, crossing the ocean 5,000 years ago, or 4,500 years ago, or even older. And what's interesting is shortly after this time, we have the reign of Tutankhamun, right? Akhenaten's son. And he only lived to be about 18 years old, but in 3 different museums in Egypt, we find his boomerang collections. Well, boomerangs are known to only come from Australia. So how does Tutankhamun
That's right.
have
Yeah.
boomerang collections? He used them for hunting. And so this would have come out of the trades that had gone on with the people or the indigenous people of ancient Australia. Well, we also have another connection, which is a connection to South America, to the Maya. And this was discovered by Stephen Mehler in the 80s. And then again, a couple of years ago, he went back to the site. And there is a tomb of Maya in Saqqara, just south of Giza in Cairo. And in the tomb, this character Maya means water, just like Os and Osgot does. Maya also means an aspect of water. And so does Marie. And so Marie is also a title that relates around water. But in this tomb, we have this character Maya, who is wearing the dreaded wigs of the ancient Commissions, which look something like this. You find these in the ancient museums. So he looks like a Cometian, even though he is not. But you go to the Elephantine Island Temple, which is the one on the right, and you go to the Temple of Isis at Philae, which is the one in the middle, and Maya is wearing this plumed, feathered headdress that you do not see on any other depiction in ancient Egypt in the hieroglyphs. And so this is the plumed serpent. This is Maya. And so this character came from South America. And we know this because when you go into the tomb of Maya and you pay the guard a little bit of bakshish, he takes you into the second room and he shines his torch up at the ceiling. And on the ceiling, we have this. Well, these are not Egyptian hieroglyphs. This is a star map. This is actually a calendar. And we've had Mayan elders look at this and say, this is symbology that we no longer use in the Mayan culture, but this comes from our elders. And so this would have been a calendar or a star map of when Maya was in ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet.
Wow.
And when we go to Peru, we're told that the Inca did not have a written language. Instead, they used these runners that would run around with these knotted ropes called quipu, and they would run from village to village, city to city, and give messages. But when I was in Peru with Brien Foerester, we went into the Cusco Museum, and there's, interestingly, this tapestry that sits on the wall. And we think that this, similar to the glyphic writing from the ancient Maya, this is a glyphic writing from the ancient Inca. And we think this because even though some of the symbols on this tapestry are the same, they're not in any specific order. They're not. And so this is actually telling a story through these symbols. And so this is supposedly or allegedly the written language of the ancient Inca that most scholars, don't even know about.
Fascinating.
So
fascinating.
where else do we find the feathered serpent motif? Well, we find it at the Temple of Isis. And so here we have this character sitting underneath the feathered snake with ritualistic instruments, meditating of sorts. But we also find this glyph at La Venta in Monument 19 as the feathered serpent, the Quetzalcoatl, or Cuculacan, which means it's like the falcon and the snake. It's the combination of these names. And we also have a connection with the Maya and Atlantis, because a lot of people think that the ancient, city or lands of Atlantis, influenced a lot of South America. There could be aspects of it in the Atlantic Ocean. I think it was a time period, not so much a place, because we're told through Plato's work that there were 5 capital cities. So if it's a place, there would be 5 capital cities. This means that it was a global culture similar to what we have today that was taken out possibly by the Halcyon Comet event, which kicked 80% of mankind out of this planet, and so the rest of us were left in the Stone Age to rebuild to where we are today. And it's interesting because on the walls of the Dendera temple on the ceiling, we have what is depicted as the Exodus of Atlantis. And so it's interesting that we find this motif in Dendera, but we also find this motif on the walls of Edfu, the Temple of Edfu, and at Karnak on one of the back walls. And sadly, because of the Muslim faith, a lot of the Muslims, when they took over ancient Egypt, they destroyed all of the facial features of these netters on the walls, because you're not allowed to depict humans in the Islamic faith. And so it's really sad that
That's
a lot of these sites have been attacked, as we call it. They've all been attacked.
That's too bad. Mm-hmm.
But also at Dendera, at the Hathor Temple, we have, this history of the cosmos that literally is stretched across the entire ceiling. And this was all cleaned in recent times. They went in because there was so much soot on the ceiling from people using torches in the old days to show this stuff that it was basically black from all the soot. And so they've cleaned this. They've repainted a lot of it so that it has some of the original colors and textures. But in one corner, they left this incredibly interesting black square. And so I started looking into what is the meaning of the black square. Well, to the left of the black square, we have Horus on his cosmic bark or his boat, and he represents healing. And to the right, we have the baboon, which is known as Jehuti or Thoth or Toot, which was also represented by the stork or the heron, because these were the two characters to the ancients that were known to have incredible knowledge. And so it's interesting that we have healing on the left, knowledge on the right, but in the middle, we have this character, Heket. Heket was either a male or female deity or netter, aspect of nature, with a frog's head, usually represented as a woman, but it represents rebirth, because frogs can impregnate themselves without a partner and have more frogs. And so it's interesting that Heket represented rebirth. And we also find Heket at the Temple of Hathor in the catacombs with the famous Dendera light bulbs. And so this is an incredibly small space. The gentleman on the right is standing in the hallway where this relief is, these glyphic reliefs are. And so if you can imagine standing there and trying to take a photo of it, it's incredibly difficult because you don't have a lot of space to do it in. And so on one side of the wall is what we know as the famous Dendera light bulb. And we're told that it's, representing Kundalini energy that's flowing out of a lotus. And it doesn't have anything to do with electricity, even though there's a Jed pillar there that would be something that would harness the electricity. But we have Heket standing there with duality, the positive and negative charges of whatever this structure is. And so it's interesting that this structure also represents rebirth. But this isn't the only depiction of the Dendera light bulb, as we're told on the History Channel and Ancient Aliens and shows on Gaia. There actually are more depictions of this in the Temple of Hathor. So if you turn around and you look at the wall behind you, you have this, which there are two more of these Jed pillar Dendera light bulbs. And if you go out of the catacombs up into the upper rooms, in one of the rooms high up on the ceiling is another representation of the same concept. And so what is this?
Yeah.
Well, this looks a lot like a plasma device or a Tesla coil. And we see depictions of this all over. And so it's interesting that if you take limestone, copper, salt water, blown glass, and black tourmaline, so black tourmaline looks something like this. This is black tourmaline.
Oh, you got one.
You can create a piezoelectric or plasma energy or electricity. And so it's interesting because when you go into the Great Pyramid, we see that in the Queen's chamber, up the shafts of the Queen's chamber, that this could have been where some of these chemicals were mixed to create a piezoelectric effect as well, which would have happened with the limestone and the granite in the Great Pyramid. And so the question is, did the ancients have a technology that would have helped the fertility of the land? And I believe the answer is yes. When you go down into the catacombs, blink and you miss it because you're stooping your head trying to go down this really narrow staircase way down into it. If you look up, this is what you see. Well, the Temple of Hathor is known as the Temple of Necklaces. But this doesn't look like a necklace. We have the 4 Hathor heads that have vessels on top of them that are connected to a larger vase through a cord system. And it looks like there's a positive and negative charge that's being passed through these 4 items from left to right. But like I said, blink and you miss it because it's on a lintel literally above the catacombs as you're going down into them. And most people don't look up or have lights down there to even see them.
I never seen this image before. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the Jed pillar is interesting because it represents stability and duality, but it also represents this higher concept of energy. And it's interesting, as I like to go back to movies, that the Jed pillar is kind of what influenced the Jedi in the Star Wars saga, the Jed, right? And the Sith comes from Set or Seth. So you have light and dark represented. And the lightsaber itself, which represents stability and duality, looks an awful lot like a Jed pillar. And so what was George Lucas trying to tell us through the esoteric knowledge in these movies? Interesting.
Right? Yeah. Interesting. Exactly.
Also, at the Temple of Seti I, a part of one of the upper lintels fell off, and we have this representation. And so if you watch Ancient Aliens or, shows on History Channel or Gaia, they always say that this is depicting a helicopter, a submarine, and a flying ship. But in reality, it's actually 2 glyphs that were written over each other. And so there's a lot of this that we see across ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, where somebody will find an ancient sculpture and then put their own glyphic writing on top of it to claim it as their own. And so if you actually look at this for what it is, these are the two different glyphic writings. So there's the light green and then there's the dark green, and this represents the two different symbols and symbology that are actually there. So it isn't a helicopter, it isn't a flying saucer, and it isn't a ship or a submarine, but it's actually two different writing styles from two different times. And we see a lot of this repurposing all over the ancient sites. The Germans came in the 1800s and they rebuilt a lot of the sites based on what they found there, because a lot of it was buried under mud and rubble. And so when you go to Elephantine Island, you can see that they were using the tops of ancient columns to basically support the paved stoneway that leads up to the Elephantine Island temples. But this was done by the Germans when they rebuilt this site. And we find the same thing at the Dendera temple when they removed one of the large granite blocks in the floor, or limestone blocks in the floor. They also found the tops of these pillars. And it's funny because Jimmy Corsetti from Bright Insights gets all excited in the video and he's like, see, there's a hidden temple underneath the temple of Dendera. And it's like, come on, Jimmy, you know better than that. These are just repurposed tops of pillars. And there is a hidden temple underneath the temple of Dendera. And that's the catacombs where the Dendera light bulb is. And that's literally underneath where this area is. But getting back to usurping other statues, one of the most egregious examples of this is Ramses II, because he's come across a lot of sculptures. You find them at Karnak, at Luxor, and even at the Ramesseum, where an older statue, for instance, the one on the left, has had Ramses' cartouche and his hieroglyphs engraved over top of the original structure. And so this statue on the left, there's a belt in the middle and there's a sword that goes through the belt. And then on top of the belt and on top of the sword is Ramses II's hieroglyphs and his cartouche. And when you go to the Ramesseum, one of the largest sculptures in Egypt fell over and broke. And on its shoulder is also the cartouche of Ramses II. But it wasn't put on its shoulder while the statue was still standing, as if to depict, oh, this is a statue of Ramses. It was put on the shoulder after the statue had fallen and was found years and years later, because the cartouche goes from left to right, not from top to bottom, as we see in the sculpture on the left. And so this is what we call a usurping of ancient sculptures, where kings would come through and, you know, put their names on it. And often the Ramses sculptures you will find are the hieroglyphs are dug so deep that other people couldn't put stuff over top of them. And so the historians claim, oh, this must be a statue for Ramses, when actually it's graffiti that was added much later. And we see this at Luxor. And Luxor is a really interesting place. We're told that it was from around 1400 BCE is when Luxor was established. But in the 1300s, the Muslims came to the city of Luxor and they found a mud hill and they built their mosque on top of it. And in the 1800s, in 1884, the Germans discovered that there was stuff underneath the hill that the mosque was sitting on top of. And they dug it out and rebuilt the city of Luxor. And so I'm a little confused with how Egyptologists and archaeologists date things, because we're all told that this is within the 7,000-year timeline, even though stuff keeps getting older and older and older. And we're also told that the Nile Valley was fertile this entire time and had been occupied this entire time. So the question is, why is this temple buried under a pile of mud and basically is all rubble that had to be rebuilt if this area was occupied through this entirety of time? And my thought is it's much older than we're being told that it is. Sitting in front of Luxor are these two statues. And the one on the right is the most interesting because at some point in ancient history, it had fallen over and cracked. When the Germans rebuilt it, they cemented it back together and they put it back upright. But in ancient times, it was repaired. And it was repaired with these giant keystone cuts. And so the two keystone cuts on the bottom left are the ones that are also on the right. These are about a foot wide by 6 inches wide and about 6 inches deep. And so either metal would have been poured into this, as we see in South America, or another piece of stone would have been put into this to keep the structure together like a jigsaw puzzle. And as you can see, the damage goes all the way up the back of the statue, all the way up to the arm, and all the way up to the headdress as well. And so this had been repaired in ancient times. So how old are these structures? How old are these statues? And we're told that all of this was made with copper saws, sand, water, copper chisels, and diorite bashing balls. This is impossible. The human hand cannot create statues of this nature of perfection with these tools. You try using copper on granite, you're going to dent the copper. You're not going to do anything to the granite. You can saw a little bit of a ways into granite and limestone using a copper saw, water, and sand, but you're not going to get precision cuts. And bashing stones, ridiculous, not happening. You don't get sculptures like this using that technology. And thanks to Christopher Dunn, who took photos of, this is the supposed head of Ramses that sits outside of Luxor. He did mathematical orientations on this and realized that there are geometries that cannot be done without lathing machines and without machine technology to begin with. The human hand can't produce this, not at this level of precision. And as he's looking at a lot of these structures and cuts, he's realizing that the plow rate is several thousand revolutions per minute, which is faster than the plow rate that we use today to cut through hard stone. And as we were talking about copper is like a 6 on the Mohs or 5 on the Mohs scale of hardness, and granite is an 8. So you can't cut something that's super hard with something that's super soft. You would have to use a stone or a crystal that's harder than granite, which would be ruby or diamond. And there's no diamond in North Africa. And so how were they cutting these? What were they cutting them with? And another of my favorite sites is known as the Osirian. And this is found behind the Temple of Seti I. This is at about the water level of the Nile. And so this floods every year. And we think this was used for alchemical processes. It used to be completely buried underground. And it was dug up during the Ptolemaic period of the Greek occupation of ancient Kemet. And on the walls, as you walk down, you got to pay the guard again, a couple $100, and he'll let you go down there for a few minutes. But on one of the walls next to the ramp that goes down, you see the flower of life symbology, and it's repeated 4 or 5 times on this wall. But on these shows on History Channel and Gaia, we're only shown one. And oftentimes people like Nassim Haramein will go and say, these were created by laser technology. Well, this isn't true. And it isn't true because Nassim was there a couple of years ago, and his guide, while he's on camera being videoed, said this was done using a hydrofluoric acid and red ochre. And so the hydrofluoric acid would burn the image into the stone, but the red ochre would be what highlights it. And it's interesting that he heard that and he turned to the camera and said, see, it was cut by laser.
Wow. Wow.
but clearly it wasn't. And hydrofluoric acid is really interesting because there's a thought that a lot of the hieroglyphs were created by using this hydrofluoric acid. And so they would take a stencil and hydrofluoric acid that they had collected from certain plants, and they would put that on top of the stencil, similar to how we do copper etching today. You use an acid and it etches into the copper, and then you have something that you can repeat and use for print. But we think that maybe a lot of the hieroglyphs were created with stencils and this hydrofluoric acid, but we don't really know. And so this then gets us to Aswan. Aswan is an interesting site. So the whole site is this massive granite, pink granite quarry that sits next to the Nile River. And when you go there, you see these massive scoop marks. And of course, Zahi Hawass, in the video that you watch while you're in the museum there, he says, but they were drinking beer and they were slaves and they were, they were treated very well. And they were bashing this out with diorite bashing stones. This is impossible. It would take hundreds of years to bash out just even a foot of this. Found there is the unfinished obelisk. It's unfinished because when they got toward the underside on the other side of it, they realized that there was a crack and it could not be used. And so they stopped production on it. In the center is my friend Jason. He's using this diorite bashing ball on a piece of granite that sits above the unfinished obelisk. It's interesting because we were there with Yousef, and Yousef says when his father was leading tours in the 70s and 80s that this stone was there as well, and very little material has been removed from it. So the fact that they were using bashing balls, that goes out the window. There's no way that they were, especially because right in front of the stone is this 3 to 5 meter deep testing pit, which looks like somebody took a plug of granite out of the earth to see the different layers and the different strengths of the granite to make sure that it was suitable for making these giant, large obelisks. And so this testing pit is a little bit larger than my foot, as you can see there in the picture. And so you would have to have used a very small child upside down, dropping the ball over and over and over again, if we're to believe that this was done with bashing stones. In reality, it was done with a square plug that was vibrated. As you can see, it has rounded corners. And so it was vibrated down, and then like an ice core sample, it was cracked off and brought back up. This was done with a technology, not with human hand. And we see even more of this with the uniform scoop marks of the second unfinished obelisk, which sits up and over the hill. You can see the same building structures in the background on the left as you do on the right. And this is a giant machine that's come down. It's about a foot wide, and it's scooped down and under this obelisk and then pulled the material back out. There's no way that somebody was doing this by hand.
Wow.
And we see more of this on the right. So this is what the scoop marks look like underneath. What are you sitting under there bashing upside down? No, there's no way this was done.
No way. Yeah.
By slaves drinking beer. And when you look at the unfinished obelisk, the trough that you can walk in, if you're allowed to go down there, is a little over 2 feet wide. And then you have all these striations of scoop marks. And we're told that the slaves stood there and bashed this out. Well, there's nowhere to stand there to bash it out. So how are they doing this?
Yeah.
This was
Lots
all
of
done with
beers.
machines.
Lots of beers there. Lots of drinks.
Lots of beer, and they're happy. Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Got a lot of
And
power.
so, even more interesting. So the unfinished obelisk, they think, weighs about 1,200 tons. So 100 tons is 200,000 pounds. Just wrap your head around that for a second.
Yeah.
100 tons would take close to 2,000 people to move. So 1,200 tons, you can only imagine. And in order to remove the, I'll go back to it. In order to remove the unfinished obelisk here on the left, they would have to remove all of the material to the right of it to move it down toward the river to put on a barge to sail up toward Giza. So they would have to have removed all of this material that you see here on the right, above the walking path, in order to get the obelisk down to the river. Well, it's interesting because when they dredged the river to create the Aswan Dam, they found no blocks of granite at the bottom of the river. And if you know anything about buoyancy, if you're going to try and put something that's heavier than the barge that you're putting it on, even though the barge will support its weight, you're going to have this teeter-totter buoyancy effect. And that 1,200-ton obelisk is going to fall into the river and will never be retrieved. But they never found any obelisks or any granite blocks at the bottom of the river from the quarry. And so it beggars the question, how did they move this? And so this gets us into the Cairo Museum, and then we can, kind of chat about this. There's a lot of information here, but in the Cairo Museum, you definitely see elements of ancient machining and machine technology. When you walk in and you turn the corner, right around the corner is one of these ancient boxes. They call it a sarcophagus. What the ancients would do is they would cut this out of diorite or granite. They would hollow out the center of it so that it looked like a box in the middle, and then they would cut the lid off of the back and put that on top so that the whole box resonated because it was made out of the same material. So we're told that this was done with copper saws and copper chisels. No chance. Here I am in the upper left with Stephen Mehler. We're looking at the guideline for the top of the box, and you can clearly see where the saw, there were two saws, one on top of the other. One was cutting through the top of the box, one was cutting through the bottom. They didn't align properly. Something happened and one buckled, and it broke off the top of the box, and they had to quit they had to quit making this box because it no longer would resonate with the top of the box broken off, and the saw slipped before whoever was using the saw corrected it, and so you can see it moving inward toward the center of the box. And so it's very obvious that this was done with a machine and in ancient times, and the machine just didn't line up. They made a mistake, and this is the result of it. And so they bury this at the back of the museum so nobody really sees it, but if you know what you're looking for, it's right there in front of you. There's also a lot of other precision items in the museum. There's this head of Ramses on the left, showing more precision cuts out of prolific diorite. There's a vase or a vessel in the upper right, also made out of prolific diorite. And when they have scanned these on the inside, it's perfectly cut as well. So it's not rough. I mean, obviously there's flaws. Nothing is super perfect.
Beautiful piece though. I mean, yeah, look at all that design. Yeah.
And on the bottom is a piece of slate. And slate is incredibly fragile. And hold on a second, because I have an artifact from this area. Where is it? Here it is. For 3 artifacts. There we go.
You have with you?
So when you go to the step pyramid, outside of the step pyramid is a rubble pile, and it has all of this, broken pieces of these vessels. And one of them that I found there is this piece of prolific diorite. And if you look at it, it's perfectly cut. This has been lathed. We're told that they did not have lathes, but this is from a bowl very similar to the slate bowl in the bottom right. That's probably about 1.5 feet wide. It's a plate, not a bowl.
No way, you got a piece of that.
So I picked this up and I took it because I wanted to study it, because the cut marks down the center are perfect. And we're told that this was bashed out with stone and copper saws. No chance.
No way.
But the most interesting of these vessels that we find in the Cairo Museum is the one in the middle, because this is made from corundum. Corundum is ruby. The only way that you could cut this is with diamond. There's no way around it.
Ruby is one of the hardest stone to cut.
It's almost as hard as diamond, yeah.
Yes, maybe
so
even harder.
how are they cutting this vessel out of corundum? It seems almost impossible. But even more fascinating is you go to the museum, the Nubian Museum, and you find these 4 vessels, and these are dated to around 1200 to 14,500 BC. They were found in carbon. They weren't carbon dated, but they were found in a tomb that was carbon dated to that date, because you can't carbon date stone. And so this is during the Stone Age. How are they making vessels of this precision during the Stone Age?
Yeah, I mean, it looks beautiful.
So
that's crazy. We have been lied to a lot.
We have.
Yeah.
I have a few more slides if we want to go through them. I mean, there's quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, since we're here, yeah.
I'll ratchet through this. So they x-rayed King Tutankhamun's headdress and realized that the mask of gold is very precisely put together. It's also interesting that we find, dealing with Tutankhamun and Akhenaten, this strange aspect of elongated skulls. And so we find this depiction of himself and his children always depicted bald with these elongated skulls. These are 2 of his daughters, also depicted in statues with elongated skulls, and also on these steles. And so the question is, what is going on here? Were they head binding their children for some reason, like we see in other places of the world, or was this natural? And I asked that question because when you go to Peru, you find that a lot of the head binding in Peru, especially the Changos skulls that you find in Paracas, these are all natural. These are not headbound. And Brien Foerester, who did the DNA on some of these, discovered that the haplogroup from these people who had red hair as well came out of this area of Azerbaijan and the Black Sea, similar to the Basque people of Spain, the Maori of Polynesia and New Zealand, and a lot of what we consider the Mongolian or Tartarian Empire also has this auburn, hair and blue-green eyes, very similar to the Paracas.
Really? That's fascinating.
We covered Tut's boomerangs and the matriarchy, but we also have this winged man at the Temple of Seti I, which is incredibly fascinating because you don't see this depiction anywhere else. It's only at the Temple of Seti I as you're walking up the ramp to go toward the Osirian. But this gets us into the anomalies of the Giza Plateau. There's a lot of precision cuts there that, again, could not be done by copper saws or chisels. This is done with machinery. And on the left at the Valley Temple, the blocks wrap around the corner, and we see this wrapping of blocks very similar in Peru, where this is all one piece of block that has been created to wrap around the corner. There's a lot of pits there in Giza that are not talked about either. And so these pits go down, several hundred feet, and they connect to a tunnel system. I believe there are 10 tunnels that are 10 layers deep. They're all internally about the size of a semi cargo container inside, and they stretch anywhere from 8 to 50 kilometers out into the western desert where the Nile used to be. And so this was all built before Giza was ever built. We're not taught about this in any of our history classes at all. And it beggars the question, what were these tunnels being used for? And the thought is they were bringing water to the ancient sites and removing water from the ancient sites. So this is me looking down one of the pits in front of the Great Pyramid. There's another pit here on the right that also goes down. Sadly, sand and trash have filled up most of these pits. There is one directly in front of the Great Pyramid, which is this pit on the left, and it goes down several hundred feet to a sand layer, again, that's covered with sand and rubble. But in ancient depictions, like on the one on the right, there's a tunnel system that goes down to a box underneath this area. And where this is depicted on the right, in front of the Great Pyramid, is exactly where this tunnel is that I'm looking down this shaft toward. And so could there be more rooms down there? This is very similar to what we call the Osiris shaft, which sits between the Great Pyramid and the Middle Pyramid. You go down several hundred feet into the earth, 4 different layers. It's dark. You're going down an incredibly rickety ladder, so not obviously for the faint of heart. You get down to the middle complex, and there are 6 alcoves. A lot of them have what we would call sarcophagus in them, but one of them has a black box that is precision cut and has this like creosote or black goo on it that people don't understand what it is. I think it's a creosote. And then you go down into the bottom chamber, and in the 90s, I think it was on ABC, they came and interviewed Zahi Hawass, and Zahi had just discovered this site and was pumping water out of it because sitting in the middle of this room at the bottom is this green quartzite granite that comes from Lebanon, and it's in the shape of the sarcophagus. But what's interesting about this box, it's all one solid piece. The lid obviously is a separate piece, and we see this in the middle. Now it sits underneath the water because this is where the water table is at Giza. But what's interesting about this box is it doesn't fit down the shaft that goes down into this room. And so the question is, how did it get down there? It doesn't fit down any of the shafts, and it doesn't fit down any of the tunnels that go off left and right. The tunnel to the right heads toward the Great Pyramid. I think this ends up underneath the well shaft in the Great Pyramid, which I'll get into here shortly. And the tunnel to the left heads toward the Western Desert. And so this is a huge curiosity as to what exactly is the Osiris shaft and how did this green quartzite box get down there. Again, the above photo of the 3 pyramids, you see 8 sides on these. You see this, convexure that's happening, and this only can be seen during the solstices. When you go into the Grand Gallery, it's incredibly beautiful. It's really interesting that all of this red quartzite granite came from Aswan. Nobody knows how it got there. Some of these blocks weigh over 100 tons, so it's incredibly fascinating going up into the Great Pyramid. Underneath the Grand Gallery is the tunnel to the Queen's Chamber. And as I said, all of these pyramids have this 8 sides, and it's thought that this could be something that would pick up radio telemetry or over the horizon radio signals. And it's interesting that in North Dakota during World War II, there was this structure built in North Dakota that was used for over the horizon radio and radar tracking. And would you know it, it looks just like a pyramid.
You know, right? Yes. I didn't know about that one. Yeah.
Super
Pretty
fascinating.
cool.
So we're told, when you go into the Great Pyramid, you can either, go in there by yourself, you pay about $200 or $300. They only take you to the King's Chamber. But if you go on a
That's what I was going to
tour,
ask you.
if you go on a tour, they give you 2.5 to 3 hours inside the entire pyramid. And they open up all of the chambers, and it's a private visit. And they tell you you can't have a religious practice, you can't have sacrifices, you can't tone, because this is all, this is insulting to the Muslim religion in a sense. But
Uh,
everybody that goes in there does exactly the opposite of that. So the second you get into the King's Chamber, everybody tones. You can see a lot of the orbs and particles in the room. Everybody in the room is toning. The room itself tones to F sharp. The box in the corner of the room, the sarcophagus, supposedly tones to A. And so if you're in the box toning to A and everybody else is in the room toning to F sharp, you feel like you're enveloped in this. It's almost like a frequency, and you feel like you're astral projecting through the universe. Sadly,
the
we
F
did have what's that?
that the F tone is a heart, right? A
Yeah.
heart frequency. Yeah.
And
Mm.
so A is a third or a fifth of the F tone or F sharp.
Ah,
And so you'll see this gentleman on the left. He's got a camera, and in front of him is this pool. This guy's like 6'5", and when you're ducking down to go into the King's Chamber, in the middle of the tunnel that goes into the King's Chamber is an alcove. And so he's scraping his head along the top of the alcove or the surface of the tunnel. And he got to the alcove, and of course his head bobbed up, but he kept moving forward. And so he split open his forehead. And so he's bleeding. We had a
oh
blood
man, poor
sacrifice in the
guy.
Great Pyramid. He's like, I
So
paid good money to be in here. I'm not leaving. And so
that's what. Now the orbs that we're seeing here, do you think, because there's different type of orbs here, do you think they're spirit or do you think they're dust? Because sometimes they can
I
be dust.
really don't know. Obviously, you're in the middle of the desert. There is a lot of dust in these
Yeah.
locations, so this could be picking up, dust particulates. But it's interesting that this showed up while we were all toning.
Yeah.
And so here I am in
Did
the
anyone
box.
experience anything? Did anyone who were there experience anything different? Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, I mean, you feel like you're having an out of body experience. And so when I'm in the
Uh,
box, I get in, I'll tone. Um, this is me basically in the box, toning to A, and once everybody's in the King's Chamber, they open up the Queen's Chamber and they open up the subterranean. And the Queen's Chamber kind of bores me. I've been in there a couple times. This is what it looks like inside. There's a niched alcove in the Queen's Chamber as well. And dug into the back of that is another tunnel that keeps going back. I put my
mm,
camera up and over the fencing there, and you can see the muon detectors from the Scan Pyramids project that was in there
mm.
looking for other chambers within the pyramid. But there's this hose that keeps going back. And so the question is, where does the hose go? How far back does this tunnel go? And why do we not know anything about this? Because it's not in any of the diagrams or depictions of the Great Pyramid. But my favorite spot, as I said, I bypass the Queen's Chamber. I go down into the subterranean. And so
Mm.
you go down 500-600 feet down into the earth. It takes a while to get down there. It takes even longer to get back up because if you're claustrophobic, yeah, it's a hard one. But you
Mm-hmm.
get down there, and when you're in the subterranean area, there's a well shaft that's caged off, and it goes down another 3 layers and has tunnels going off to the left and right of it. But we're not allowed to go down there, and we're never told what's down there because, again, it's not in the depictions of the
Mm.
Great Pyramid either. And to the right of this, on the back side of the room, is what is called the dead end shaft, and it goes back about 30 meters. It's about a meter tall and wide, and it's all solid bedrock. So you're ripping your knees apart crawling down this. And I will
Wow.
crawl down to the end of this. I believe that it's cemented off, and there's a hole, as you can see here. There's a hole that's been drilled through to the other side. And the question is, where does this tunnel go? But I'm not sure if you can see it in this photo. The entire ceiling of this shaft is covered in about an inch thick of salt. And so this
Wow, I
salt
can't
would have
see it.
been,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, the salt would have been from the water and the chemicals that were mixed in the Great Pyramid to create energy. And people have graffitied their names in the salt, which you can kind of see on the ceiling. But
Wow.
It's hard to see. So I will go from the king's chamber all the way down to the subterranean. So I have an out of body experience in the king's chamber, and then I will ground myself at the end of the dead end shaft. I'll turn off my torch, I'll do my meditation, and then I'll sit there in lotus position in complete darkness, in complete silence. And it is so loud down there, it's unbearable. But you're not physically hearing anything. You're feeling the energy of your own body. There's no sound down there, but
Wow.
it sounds so loud because you're in complete isolation. And this is interesting because this is very similar to what people experience when they're in isolation chambers, like these samadhi tanks where you go in and it's like 2,000 pounds per square inch of salt water and you just float. And eventually, in your middle of your 90-minute session, you do one of these. Oh God, how long have I not been breathing for? Because you go into a state of breathless samadhi while you're in there. And this is why
Yeah.
they're called sensory
Yeah.
deprivation or isolation tanks. And so, other anomalies around the Giza Plateau, obviously, is the water damage that we find around the Sphinx enclosure. The Sphinx was dug out of this, and all the blocks of limestone and granite were used to build the Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple, which sits in front of the Sphinx. But
So hence, where's the water came from? Where's the water came from?
Dr. Robert Schoch believes that this could have been an affect of the Halcyon Comet or even older, when this whole area was jungle and would have been rained upon relentlessly. Because this is runoff and wash off water. This isn't made from wind and sand. This is actually from water. Well, the last time there was significant amount of water on the Giza Plateau was 10,000 BC. So how old is the Sphinx? It's old. And as we're told, there's nothing to see at the Sphinx. There's nothing inside of it, but there is this shaft at the rump, the backside of the Sphinx. So you got to make sure the guards aren't looking at you, and you remove the little thing, and you go down the ladder. And this is what you see once you're down the ladder. There are tunnel systems underneath and inside of the Sphinx. So, as Edgar Casey said, is there a hall of records in there? There quite possibly could be, but Zahi Hawass has told us for years there's nothing to see here. There's no tunnels in the Sphinx, even though there are.
Well, I think it was removed, either removed, was there a fire down there before, from what I heard?
Don't know. Yeah, good question. When you're at the front of the Sphinx, there's a boardwalk that you're standing on, but in old times there was a stairway that went down beneath the stela in between the two paws. And so it possibly went down to a tunnel system. Other anomalies are like the Red Pyramid, similar to the Grand Gallery. The Red Pyramid is an interesting place. It has these 3 chambers that look very much like the Grand Gallery and the Great Pyramid, all corbelled ceilings. It's interesting that one goes back, and then slightly adjacent to it is another of these chambers, and then you have to climb up, go through a tunnel, and then it shifts to the right is another chamber. And I think that there could be a repeat of this, a duality or a mirroring of this on the other side, but obviously we've never been told what's over there. But when you look at what's going on in these 3 chambers, this is what the 3 chambers look like. And so chamber 1, chamber 2, and then you have to climb up to chamber 3, and you go down this hallway, and at the end of the hallway you turn right and you see this room in the center. Well, what's interesting about the room in the center is they dynamited the floor out looking for treasures, so that's unfortunate. And there's this cement plug in the upper wall around where the tunnel that goes into this chamber is. And so the question is, were they looking for other tunnel systems that repeated on the other side? Because as I said, you can kind of see in this diagram on the left, these tunnel systems that go back, and there possibly is a mirroring of them on the other side.
Oh.
But this takes us into my favorite spot, and then we can kind of close up after this. And that is the Serapeum. The Serapeum is a complete mystery. So you have a man-made tunneled cave system dug out of the bedrock. So bedrock in Egypt is granite. So this is a quartz crystalline material. If you've ever been around mines or miners, you hear of this thing called miner's lung. And that is because in the old days, they didn't have the proper materials. They weren't using water, and they weren't using filtration mask systems. They were inhaling the dust particles as they were cutting into the mines. And this would scar their lung tissue, and they would die an early death. But what's interesting about the Serapeum is there's no soot on the ceilings. So torches haven't been burned down there. And there's 28 alcoves that look something like this. And each one of these alcoves faces not magnetic north, but due north. And each one of these alcoves sits down about 6 feet from the tunnel system itself. And in it are these giant 100-ton perfect prolific diorite granite boxes. Perfect.
Wow.
And they're perfectly aligned in this tunnel system. And it's called the Serapeum because of the seraph bull. They thought it was a burial site for seraph mummies or for the mummified bulls. Where the arrow is and the number sign 2, there's a tunnel system that goes off there. There's an it's not older, it's a newer cave system that goes off from that that's very poorly constructed. And in that, they found a mummified bull. And that's why they thought the entire site was for these bulls. But they really don't know what this site was used for. All of these boxes are huge. They look something like this. They were all hermetically sealed. They're very, very precisely constructed with 90-degree corner angles on the inside, mirror finish, polish. Only one of them has hieroglyphic writing on it, and it looks like it was chicken scratched into the side. So whoever put the writing on the box is not the person that made the box. So we're looking at 2 different time periods. And 2 of the boxes were left in situ. They were just left in the hallways, like the box on the right. So this box weighs 100 tons. That's 200,000 pounds. And you can barely squeeze around the side of it to go down the tunnel system. So how did they move this box into this tunnel? This is what the crude graffiti hieroglyphs look like on the outside of one of the boxes that you can actually get into. Here I am inside of the box. You can see the precision cuts of the walls, as well as the ceiling is so mirror polished that you can see my reflection in it. We had a gentleman that had a laser down there, and so he was showing how precise the walls were with his laser. And we don't really know what these boxes were made for. They were all empty when they were discovered. But we think that they could have been used for like seed vaults or a way of preserving something during a cataclysm. We do this today. And so the question is, why would you need boxes of this size? Just to give you an idea of what 100 tons or 200,000 pounds is, this heavy lifter loader on the left weighs 100 tons and can lift about 50 tons. And you find these at mining sites today. A human being comes up to about the lower portion of one of the wheels, just to give you an idea of how big these machines are. They're huge. Okay.
Yes.
On the right is a gathering with 1,000 people. So it would take close to 2,000 people to move one of these boxes.
Impossible. Yeah.
Okay. Where are these people standing? How are they moving in these tunnels with 2,000 people? There's no room for them. And they didn't have the use of pulleys. They just had rope systems. So how are they moving these boxes in and out of these tunnels? And how are they lowering them down and precisely aligning them to north in each of the alcoves, 6 feet below the hallway? We can't even do
answer. Do you know the answer, Hans?
I don't. We can't even do this with our technology today, you know. And so you start looking at these sites with these massive precision cuts, and you've got to stop and wonder, they were using some sort of a technology. Well, we don't have evidence of the technology, but we do. It's right there in the stone. We might not have the tools. If you were to leave your car sitting in a junk pile for 100 years, what would be left of it? Not much. Right?
What if they don't use the tools at all?
What if they weren't using the tools? Good question.
Yes.
What if they were using water or vibration? Because water is found at all of these ancient sites. And so I always like to end with this, you know, we are the light, you know, we are enlightened. And so
you turn into the light.
Exactly. That's the end of my lecture on Egypt and Kemet.
Amazing.
And I hope it's been beneficial to your listeners, because there's a lot of anomalies that we find in Egypt. And the first one is that the history of Egypt is completely wrong. And so once we start with that, we have to start realizing that the history of Egypt goes way back further, and there could have been a technological component to it. So anyway.
I think it's a lot more advanced back then, you know, Hans, with the technology they have.
Yes.
where we don't have it today, because look at all those structures. It's
And we
impossible.
can't even recreate these structures with the technology that we
Mm,
have today. And so
yeah,
what
yeah.
were they using? You know, it's incredibly fascinating that we have the evidence. Obviously, the sites were built, but we have no idea. We can't even, conceive of how they were built. So
Did you enjoy
anyway,
your trip? Did you enjoy your trip in Egypt?
I've been there twice. So yeah, that's
Hmm.
I'll go back again. The first time I went,
Like, how did you get into some of those places that I don't think it was allowed to go
so
in?
when you're on these tours, you get special access permission. That's
Ah,
that's
I
that's
did.
part of what you pay for, and obviously the tours aren't, as I said earlier, they're a little expensive, but they're not. They're expansive, and I mean it's amazing to go onto one of these tours because
Expansive, guys. When it comes to money, you have to think of it as
yeah,
expansive, not expensive.
exactly. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, and that to me is the most amazing. They had just opened up the Osiris shaft, or the tomb of Osiris, in 2017, and so I was lucky to be one of the
Oh,
first
wow.
tours in 2018 to go down there. I'm not sure how often they allow people down there, but that was one of the exclusive
Well, I
sites that we
heard
get to go to.
there are certain places they don't allow you to go in,
Yep,
and according to what you show in the picture, I think some of those places weren't allowed for anyone just to go in. Yeah,
not
yeah.
really. There's other sites near Giza as well that are sadly on a military base. There was a movie that was produced there in the early 20s or 30s,
Hmm.
showing ancient Egypt, but it's this I can't remember the name of it. I Aliet Iwan, something like this is the name of the site, and it's
Right.
an unfinished pyramid. It's just it's a shaft that goes down into the ground. It's all open, and there's this round box or sarcophagus that sits in the middle at the bottom, and
Oh, wow.
it's like an oval shape, and it's perfectly scooped out like a bathtub. And this is similar to, I guess there's one of these that you find in Rome or in the Vatican that's also made out of this Aswan granite, one solid piece, and it's massive. It's this
That's
massive
fascinating
tub.
with this piece of granite, precision cut. You
Yeah,
could do all that stuff. It's
yeah.
fascinating. Are you going to go back there again?
I would love to actually. I might go in February. It depends on the Conscious Life Expo. There's a Templar tour that's happening there, and so I've seen the Commission tour. I've been on the Rosicrucian tour. It'd be nice to see, a little bit
Okay.
of information coming out of what the Templars were doing there, because there's
Let me know
Templar
when you're
crosses
going.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should.
But
It's
first, we're
it's
gonna
it's
go
the
and
middle of
meet you at the
February.
Conscious. Yes.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone, Dan's gonna be at the Conscious Live Expo 2025 in Los Angeles. That's why I went this year too. So, you want to go and meet Hans in person, get your book signed, get his book. Please do go
I'm
there.
I'm coming out with a third one. It's a compendium for ancient Kemet.
Oh,
This is part of
wow.
my workshop when I was in Mount Shasta, and so
That's a,
I put together all the symbology around
I
ancient
like that.
Kemet that we just talked about. A little bit of the history, the 20
Awesome.
page pamphlet, but obviously I'll be writing it into more of a book. And then, as we discussed at the beginning of the show, I've also done recently a series with Walter Bosley where we talked about the mystery of Shambala and the people trying to find Shambala. And so that's definitely a topic that we should
Hey,
cover in the near
maybe we
future.
can, well, let's get Hans back again for Chambala.
Excellent.
Him back before he got so famous, and that I'm not gonna be able to catch him again. Just
Of
like
course
some
you
of the
will.
speakers. That's what happened to some of the speakers. I catch them, I caught them when they weren't known, and now many of them are well known. Even Gail, Ishmael, I know them before they became so famous. So, with that said, oh my God, it's a lot of information to take in on this video, but it's great information. It's quite fascinating. A lot of stuff that we were told, absolutely, we were lied to. A lot of
Of
stuff we were
course.
lied to. So I'm glad that you are doing all this, Han, just to open up, the other side that we don't know
I'm here
about.
to introduce people to things that they haven't really, thought about. And thank goodness for the internet. We now have
Yeah.
the ability to do our own research. I always suggest people, if you're gonna, if you're interested in these subjects, go to these sites. Go to
Yes.
Peru, go to Egypt, go to
Oh,
India,
I want to
see
go
them for
there.
yourself. Because what you see on these documentaries isn't what you see when you're there. And when you're
Yeah.
there, you have a consciousness that's so much more awakened to what you're looking at than something that you're watching in a documentary.
And you feel the energy over there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was so funny earlier when you were talking about the pharaoh that they're all female. It's
Yeah.
interesting because when I went to Cambodia to that temple, what
Angkor
is it?
Wat. Yeah.
Yes.
I've
Every
never been there.
statue,
That's another
you gotta
bucket
go
list for
there.
me.
You will feel the energy. Every statue there in the temple, they're all female.
Yes.
I did not see one male, and I noticed that with my friend. We went there and we're like, "Yeah, how there's all female statue,
And it's interesting because the Buddha is often depicted as either being male or female
males only.
or a mix. Yeah. So we
Yeah,
see
you don't
this
see
aspect
female,
a
you
lot.
see mostly male.
Yeah.
So that's what
Interesting.
when you mentioned about that, I was like, wow, you're right, because back then female were the one who's I guess have the power. It's
Yes.
interesting. Wow.
Well,
Well, let's
and
do it again. Let's do
yeah,
the Shambhala again, Hans. Guys.
I was going to say we were talking about ancient star maps and star alignments. Angkor Wat, according to Graham Hancock, who his book about reflecting the sky to the earth,
Yeah.
he started looking at Angkor Wat as being a layout of the constellation of Draco, and so I find this fascinating, and
I believe that.
that's why I'm interested in trying to find out about these towers in Kham Tibet, because if we can see what they look like from above, they could also be laid out in a star pattern, and that would be really
That could
fascinating to
be
see.
a mirror of the star pattern too. You should look into that, Hans, because I think there's a lot of I think there's pyramid down there.
Oh, wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I felt the
We're
energy. I
finding
felt
them
very
all over
strong.
the world. So
I
what
felt
is
very
what?
strong. You
Yeah,
gotta go. I think you should go there. I think it's a place that you can discover something magical over there.
you're
Yeah,
talking about Cambodia. Yeah, I need
yeah.
to go there. I have a friend that lives in Cambodia, and so it'd be nice to visit and see the
God,
sights.
free stay over there. Go. It's cheap,
I need
inexpensive.
to clone myself so I can go to all these sites. Of
I know, right? Because you got invited all over.
course, my
So
clone will go and leave me at home working, and so yeah, that wouldn't
wouldn't
work
it be
out so
nice? You
well.
split your body. Just
Maybe I can find out how to astral project and
there you
consciously go
go.
there in my
Oh man,
dream state.
it's amazing
Well, Tina,
place.
this has been awesome. I appreciate the platform, and I
Thank you
hope your
so
audience really
much,
enjoyed
Han.
this.
This is great, great. Another great talk. Definitely. I'm gonna catch you for the next one, Chambala, because that's interesting too. I'm always been, curious about that subject. So let's do that, Han.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
before Hans got so famous at the Conscious Life Expo, and if anyone wants to go and meet him, go there 2025, contact him.
It's
And if you
beginning
want
of
to buy,
February. I'm not quite sure the dates yet, but I believe it's at the
yeah,
beginning of
it's the
February.
second weekend of February. Every year, it's
Yeah.
never fail. They never move, always the second weekend. Yeah. I mean, they've
And
been doing on the
I will be speaking. I'm trying to arrange this now. I'll have a 90-minute lecture at noon on Friday, so it'll be the first Friday at
oh
noon.
yeah.
And so I don't
Usually
think
they
there's any
start on
other
Friday.
workshops going on. Yep. So I'm
Yeah. You should do on
good slot.
yeah, Saturday good slot too. Saturday,
Just
Sunday.
there was nothing open. They were all like late night, eight in the evening, and that's the dead zone. So I'm glad that noon is has opened up for me. And so I
Well,
now need
because
to.
a lot of regulars who's been going there for years, they took all those slot. That's
Yeah,
why.
correct.
Yeah. But there's people who go. Yeah, definitely. So, guys, check out Hans books. Just go underneath the description of this video and you're gonna find his link. Go to his page. Buy his books. And you want to invite him for, being a speaker in any of your events. If you are an event organizer, please do. He's
Yeah, please do
amazing,
reach out.
full of new knowledge. Reach out to him. There's a contact there. Click like, subscribe to this channel, and please do share. Do share his knowledge. I thank you so much, for watching this and following this channel. And thank you so much. I'll see you again in the next talk.
You
Chambala.
will. Thank you so much. Have a great
Oh,
day,
thank
and
you
thank
so
you,
much.
audience. Glad
Yes,
glad